pinned against jagged stone. 12 SEALs knew they had minutes left. Enemy fire thundered from every ridge, a machine gun sighted in to finish them. Command had abandoned them. No air cover, no hope. Major Talia Wolf Ramirez steadied her rifle, grit on her face, whispering that she would take the last shot standing if she had to. Then a single crack cut across the valley. The heavy weapon fell silent. Another shot, another enemy collapsed, and a voice cut in over their dying radio. "Bravo team, this is Ghost 6. Hold!" That one voice carried 30 years of secrets and the precision of a man who should have been long gone. Who was he? What promise from the Cold War was he keeping? This is VeteranBiker. Comment 1 if you're new, 2 if you've been with us, 3 if you ride with us every week. Like, subscribe, and stay to the end. The sun sat high and merciless over the Blue Ridge, turning the gulch into a hot anvil where sound hit the rock and came back twice as loud. The hillside scrub, scraggly juniper, brittle grass, pale dust offered almost no cover, only splintered ledges and a few tooth-like stones to lean behind. Bravo Team Viper lay scattered across that broken spine of earth, breaths tight, eyes burning. Helmets nicked white where bullets had kissed them and failed to bite through. The air itself tasted metallic, a tang that clung to the tongue and wouldn't leave. Lieutenant Commander Logan Hawk Mercer pressed his back to an angled slab, knuckles slick inside his glove. His left hand was wrapped with a field bandage that had already soaked through, darkening in the seams like ink wicking across paper. He flexed the fingers anyway, testing what strength remained, and then pushed the pain into a small, locked room in his mind because there was no room for it in the one he needed to think with. He ran his eyes over the terrain, the ridge line above, the dry wash below, the notch to the east that looked like an escape and was actually a funnel, and built a map that kept changing every few seconds with each burst of enemy fire. Rounds chewed the rim of his stone, sending tiny avalanches of grit down his sleeve. He glanced right. 2 of his men had wedged themselves behind a slab barely the size of a door, taking turns to pop and return fire. On his left, a young operator named Pruitt had a thin smear of blood on his cheek, where a pebble had flown up. Pruitt's breathing sounded too loud in Mercer's ear, a ragged saw through the comms he had to steady the kid without saying the word calm, because words like that never helped. "Tight sectors," Mercer murmured, voice kept low, the cadence smooth as if he were calling a drill on a range. "Short bursts. Conserve." The reply clicks came back, 2 quick, 1 long, then a soft whisper from farther up the slope. Major Talia Wolf Ramirez lay prone in a patch of brittle bush that barely covered her shoulders. Dust streaked her cheek beneath the eye black, sweat tracing a crooked line down to the edge of her jaw. Her rifle rested quiet, the barrel pointed at a crease in the rocks, across the wash where an enemy machine gun had flashed earlier. She was still, and because she was still, the whole team seemed steadier. Ramirez didn't blink when more dirt flurried near her scope. She measured the wind by the flicker of grass heads and the heat shimmer rising off stone. A whiff of burned powder drifted to her, then another, and each one she filed away with the direction it came from. The gullies here played tricks, sending sounds skittering in circles, but smells were honest. And you could sometimes triangulate with your nose when your ears tried to lie. "Talk to me," Mercer said. "Multiple positions," Ramirez answered, voice a thread. "Top shelf and mid-shelf, 1 heavy, 2 light. They're adjusting. They know we're pinned. Copy." Higher up the ridge, Petty Officer D. Calvorson pressed a hydration tube to his, cracked lips without actually drinking, just wetting his mouth enough to swallow. He checked his last 2 magazines with motions that were almost ceremonial, counting, quietly, sliding them back in place with a care that felt like respect. Beside him, Santos bared his teeth in something not quite a grin and not quite fear. The two of them exchanged a look that said more than either could voice over the net. It said, "Stay angry, not scared." It said, "We're here until we're not." Another burst ripped out of the opposite slope. Mercer tracked the line by impact spark and dust plumes. The heavy weapon was crawling, feeling for angles, probing where their stone teeth thinned. It wouldn't be long before it found a cut that let it rake them clean. He pictured what would happen then, not to dwell on it, but to understand the next 30 seconds of ground truth. If the heavy got direct line on the center cluster, they'd have to break left and drop into the wash to survive the first sweep. The wash was a bad place, but not as bad as being sanded off the hillside. He thumbed his radio to higher and got the same response he'd gotten 10 minutes ago, 20 minutes ago, a lifetime ago. Acknowledgement in the flat voice of a controller who had other channels to watch, other blips to care about. The words were correct. The tone felt like a door gently closing. "Nearest air is spooling," the controller said. "ETA. Stand by." "We've been standing by," Mercer replied, but he kept the bite out of it. Marking positions read amber black. "We are amber going black." "Copy, Bravo. Keep your head down." A thin laugh cut from someone's mic and snapped off. Mercer pretended not to hear it. He couldn't build resentment into the pile. He could only stack information. He looked back downslope. The dry wash winked with scattered brass, an accidental glimmer that in any other place might have been pretty. Above it, a column of gnats found warmth in the heat ghosting from the rock. Wildflowers, tiny, stubborn, shivered in a sliver of shade. The world carried on, indifferent to little wars. "Wolf," Mercer said, "how's your sightline on that heavy?" "I can suppress," Ramirez said. "Can't promise a kill from here." "It's tucked tight, the barrel showing, not the carrier." "Hold for my mark." He signaled Halvorsen and Santos to peel 5 yards left on the break, then swung eyes to Pruitt. "You with me?" Pruitt nodded, a quick bird-like jerk. He was steadying. The smear on his cheek had dried to a dark comma. He tightened his sling and breathed twice, in through the nose, out through the mouth, the cadence he'd been taught for shooting and adopted for not thinking too much about dying. The next enemy burst came higher, probing for an angle on Ramirez. She flattened more, tucking chin, barrel unshaken. Mercer watched the arcs fan across the hillside and pictured the crew on the other side, one on the grip, one feeding, one spotting. Men taught by someone who believed in geometry more than terror, working the problem of stone and flesh. "Shift right," Ramirez whispered a second later. "I have a look." Mercer braced. "Take it." Her rifle coughed, not loud, a disciplined punctuation. Across the wash, the heavy weapon's tone changed, as if a tooth had broken in a gear. A scream leapt up and cut off. The next burst came 4 degrees low and sputtering, the feed knocked askew. Ramirez didn't smile. She cycled, settled, waited for the crew to overcorrect, and then chipped at the spotter's rock until a helmet brim edged out. She took the brim. The head jerked back, and suddenly the rhythm of enemy fire lost its confidence. "Nice," Santos breathed, and this time Mercer let the praise ride the channel. A thread of morale braided itself into everybody's spine. It lasted 8 seconds. Then the hillside above them flickered with fresh flashes, not the heavy, a string of lighter muzzles stuttering in unison. The sound didn't travel so much as it appeared on top of them, unexpected, like a wasp nest kicked underfoot. Chips of stone sleeted the air. Pieces of grey shale shattered into blade-thin shards that stung where they touched skin. Mercer dropped, curled the hurt hand tight to his plate, and listened to the pattern. This was a bracket. The opposition had opened a second box inside the first, narrowing their breathing space. He watched the dust plumes walk toward Pruitt's door-sized slab and felt the shape of the next minute form like a bruise he could already see. "Wolf, shift to my 2, he said. "We need a pin on that flank." On it. Her body flowed 1 inch at a time, hardly any silhouette, a snake in stuttering sunlight. She found a seam no wider than a helmet strap and threaded her barrel through. She didn't fire. She waited until the rhythm up top had to inhale, and then shoved 2 rounds exactly where the breath sat. 2 stutters disappeared from the chorus. Pruitt let out a breath that sounded like he'd been holding it since childhood. He slotted his own controlled pair at the place Ramirez had chalked, and then dropped. His rifle just long enough to shake his fingers loose, as though flicking water off. He was learning, the way you learn in the worst classroom on Earth. Mercer checked the skyline again. Movement to the east, an angled antenna just showing around a pale boulder. The end of a radio whip maybe, an ear listening for their panic. He etched the sight into memory. Not time for that yet. Another attempt to reach air yielded the same stall. They were not the only noise on the net. He pictured the controller's screen, call signs bubbling, priorities rearranged, lifelines cut to fit limited blades. It wasn't malice. It was math. He let himself count. Not numbers, but heartbeats, if only to measure what the team could do on their own. He counted through a short lull, through the tick of a rock warming in the sun. Somewhere down in the wash a cicada droned, bold as a siren. Men tried not to cough. Halverson's voice rode the net, softer than before. "Boss, I can creep 5 more left if Santos takes my lane." Mercer glanced, calculated. "Make it 3, he said. "Then stop. If you draw, you cut back twice as fast." Santos be his wall. They shifted like a joint cracking. It worked. The enemy fire chewed at the space Halverson had just left, as if it had smelled him but couldn't see him. He and Santos were tighter now, 2 pieces of the same small animal, and the machine gun across the wash was still hurting from Ramirez's work. The day, which had been sprinting downhill into the worst kind of end, hesitated on its shoes. Mercer let himself breathe once the way he wanted to. Full, slow, mouth closed. He pictured the map again and felt one avenue open, a dirty one down the wash and through a stand of scrub that promised concealment but not cover. It could get 3 or 4 of them out of this position if someone else did something foolish somewhere else to draw eyes. He knew who would volunteer for that job and pushed the thought of it away. "Status," he said. Clicks and whispered words came back. 2 magazines here, 1.5 there, a cut on a knee that needed nothing now. Pruitt's breathing finally regular, Santos's voice stripped of its earlier humor and suffused with something steadier. Ramirez's answer was as before, set. That one word had a weight he wanted to bottle. The enemy tried another climb on their bracket, this time dropping their lighter bursts to herd the team into the center. Mercer didn't let them take that step. He had Halverson punch at the lip of a rock, where he knew a foot would hunt for traction. The shot broke the bracket's rhythm, made it stumble. Rogers, quiet Rogers, whose voice barely ever cracked the channel, added a shot that wasn't pretty but was honest. The hillside above them went quieter, not safe, never that, but hesitant. For a moment the only sound was the mountain breathing and the insect with its electric prayer. Mercer wiped the back of his wrist across his mouth and tasted dust and copper. He looked up into the glare until his eyes watered, then back down to the ridge across. The day had gotten hung up on a single idea. Survive 1 more minute. He decided to help it. "Wolf," he said, "on my mark. Give them a reason to blink. I want their heads turned to you, not to the wash." A beat of silence that wasn't doubt, just calculation. Ready. He counted internally to 4. Mark Ramirez didn't unleash, she stitched. 3 precise taps that rewrote the geometry of courage on the other side. A shape ducked when it should have held. Another shape tried to be brave and became a target. The heavy crew that had been nursing its wound panicked and shoved their feed in crooked, and their hesitation sent a wave of uncertainty down their line, the way a fish turns and the whole school follow because it's simpler to agree than to think. Now, Mercer told Halverson and Santos, and the pair slid like shadow into the next bite of cover, as if the rock had grown a new nook just for them. The hillside roared awake again, angry at being fooled, pelting stone where the 2 men had been. Shards tinked off Mercer's helmet like small bells. He leaned into the slab and let the storm pass, eyes closed for the duration of 5 heartbeats. And then open again because it was safer to watch your own luck than to trust it. He went to key the radio to higher one more time. Stubborn, hopeful, foolish, whatever. It was. And that was when the channel fuzzed in a way it hadn't done before. Not the ordinary static of distance. Not the noisy crush of too many people speaking. This was a clean interruption, a thin ribbon of sound sliding under all the others like a knife. "Bravo!" a voice said. Not loud, not excited. The syllables were even, unhurried, as if the speaker had all the time in the world and had chosen generously to lend them some. "You're not alone." The words were 4 soft pebbles dropped into a well. They echoed in Mercer's headset, then in his chest. For a second, nobody on their side spoke, as though language itself had stepped back to let the idea arrive first. Mercer's first thought was that he'd imagined it, that exhaustion had finally put a hand on his shoulder and turned him toward the wrong light. Then he caught Ramirez's sharp inhale. Halverson hissed a single syllable that could have been a prayer in some other life. Mercer keyed his mic, careful to keep the steel in his voice and not the tremor he felt under the steel. "Identify." Static brushed the channel like cloth, drawn over furniture long covered. The same voice returned, carrying no emblem, no rank, only a certainty that pulled the world taut around it. "Hold position," it said. 30 seconds. I'll take the first mouth that bites." Mercer's mouth was dry. He swallowed, tasted stone. He wanted to demand proof, code words, an authentication he could write in a log he didn't have time to keep. He wanted to protect his people from false hope as fiercely as he protected them from bullets. He wanted, finally, to believe that somewhere on this scalped ridge there was a set of eyes on their side that could see farther than his. He looked at Ramirez. Her gaze was pinned to the opposite slope, but he could tell she'd heard it because every muscle in her face had remapped itself into something almost dangerous, focus sharpened with relief denied. Slowly she nodded once, not at him but at the vast invisible arithmetic that ran beneath every fight. Timing, angle, breath. 30 seconds, Mercer said on the net. Because sometimes leadership was the art of turning a stranger's promise into a plan you could bleed for. "We hold." The sound of the stranger's voice had barely faded before the ridge erupted again. Automatic fire tore down from above, a sharper rhythm than before, like a drumbeat accelerating toward frenzy. The enemy had read their hesitation and wanted to drown it in lead. Mercer ground his teeth and lifted his head just enough to gauge. Dust geysers leapt around their makeshift shields, bouncing off rock, peppering exposed forearms. The opposing gunners weren't wasting ammunition anymore. They were tightening, rehearsing the final sweep. "Stay tucked," Mercer said into the net. His tone carried not comfort but command, the kind of calm forged when panic had no place left to root. Talia Ramirez shifted her cheek against the rifle's comb. Through her optic, the ridge opposite her swam with movement. Two silhouettes advanced with discipline, using bounding overwatch. Behind them, she glimpsed the gleam of belt links dangling from a machine gun, ready to re-establish dominance once they found a firing shelf. She exhaled, timing the rise and fall of her chest with the sway of heat mirage. Her finger brushed the trigger, but Mercer's voice crackled again. "Wait!" The voice that wasn't Mercer's returned, low and certain. "My shot!" Before she could question, the world split with another single crack. Clean, distant, precise. One of the advancing figures folded at the waist, knees giving, rifle clattering across stone. The second man halted, startled, pivoting to cover his comrade. A follow-up round cut through his shoulder and threw him sideways. Silence bloomed for a half-second, unnatural in a battlefield where noise had been constant. Ramirez blinked behind her scope, the realization dawning whoever spoke over the net was delivering exactly what he promised. Mercer seized the pause. Shift fields now. They'll adjust. Halverson and Santos crawled crab-like to a new jut of rock, while Pruitt darted between shadows with adrenaline sharpening his movements. The team re-anchored, teeth bared, trying to match the momentum their unseen ally had gifted them. But the enemy wasn't rattled for long. From the north spur, a volley of grenades lobbed in arcs, thumping earth and stone, scattering debris over their helmets. One shell buried itself shallow and belched smoke instead of shrapnel, a marker round. Ramirez's eyes widened as she recognized the tactic: paint the target for concentrated fire. "Down!" she barked, pressing herself flat. Tracer fire lanced the valley, searing lines across the haze. The mountain became a cage of luminous streaks, every spark tracing where the seals were pinned. The foreign gunners were reading the smoke cloud and walking their fire through it. Rogers cursed as rock splinters tore at his sleeve. Pruitt ducked low, hands trembling as he fought to jam a fresh mag. Halverson tried to lay suppressive fire, but the incoming barrage drove him lower, pressing him almost flat to the dust. Over the net, the unknown voice spoke again, calmer than the chaos deserved. "Their flank is open. Watch the crest to your west." Counting. 3, 2. A thunderclap rang out. Through the swirling haze, Ramirez caught sight of a figure tumbling backward from the ridge lip, rifle flailing. Then another shot, and a second enemy collapsed into the rocks. The tracers faltered, hesitation creeping in. Mercer used the moment. "Wolf, tag the heavy barrel when it shows." She didn't need more instruction. As the machine gun tried to resume its deadly rhythm, its barrel poked into view just long enough. Ramirez squeezed. Sparks flew and the feed jammed halfway. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the seals weren't being shredded. The hillside across from them flickered with uncertainty. The attackers, trying to reset their dominance but stung by unseen precision. Still, Mercer's gut churned. He knew this was temporary. Their enemy hadn't come here as amateurs. They were coordinated, well-fed, drilled. Whoever was running them understood patience. That meant another tactic was already being set in motion. "Check gear," Mercer ordered. "We're not out." Around him, his operators complied, each movement tinged with urgency. Pruitt slammed a new mag home with a slap too loud. Santos adjusted his sling, muttering under his breath. Rogers leaned back to rewrap a cut on his arm, blood staining the cloth deeper with each knot. Then Ramirez's voice cut in, sharp. "Sir, I see it." Mercer tracked her line of sight. Across the valley, nestled against a stone shelf, sat a small box with an antenna glinting in the sun. It wasn't enemy comms, it was theirs. A chill slid down Mercer's spine. "That's one of ours!" The realization snapped through the team. They hadn't just been hunted by coincidence. Someone had painted them, fed their location, and kept the opposition updated with American hardware. "That's why they're this good," Halverson growled. "They've got our pulse." Mercer's jaw tightened. "Wolf, mark it, but don't hit. I want proof." She lowered her rifle a fraction, torn between instinct and order. The foreign crew was already repositioning to guard it, indicating its value. That sealed the truth. This wasn't random. Someone in a high chair had betrayed them. The stranger on the radio returned, voice carrying something harder now. "You found the beacon. Destroy it, or you won't last another volley." Mercer hesitated. Evidence mattered. But survival mattered more. He weighed it, then nodded once. "Wolf, burn it." Her shot cracked, and the antenna snapped in half. A spark leapt, then a puff of smoke. Across the valley, a chorus of frustrated shouts rose as the enemy lost their live feed. But their fury came like a storm. From multiple shelves, coordinated fire erupted, trying to crush Bravo team before they could capitalize. Dust mushroomed, ricochets howled, and every man and woman in the team felt the pressure of professional killers determined to finish the job. Ramirez flattened again, her pulse hammering. She could feel grit in her teeth, taste the acrid bite of burned propellant. Still, her eyes stayed on the scope. She had lived through training that told her one clear sight picture could mean the difference between a story retold and a name etched on a wall. Mercer shifted behind his cover, working angles in his mind. The betrayal explained the precision, the uncanny timing of the ambush. But it also meant their fight wasn't just for survival. It was tangled in something larger, something orchestrated. "Hold," he said firmly, voice dragging steadiness out of air filled with chaos. "We fight until they blink again." The hidden rifle answered as if on cue. Another enemy silhouette dropped, the distant crack carrying across the valley like punctuation. The SEALs looked at each other through dust-caked visors. They didn't know the man behind the voice, but they knew this. For the first time in the kill box, someone else was fighting beside them. And that was enough to keep them in the game. Even as the ridge shook with the next storm preparing to break, the ridge quieted. Not with peace, but with the wary stillness of predators' shifting tactics. Bravo team hugged stone, sweat carving pale tracks through dirt caked on their faces. Every chest rose and fell quickly, the human body trying to match the mountain's unrelenting tempo. Ramirez pressed her lips tight, eyes sweeping the opposite shelf for fresh movement. She felt her muscles tremble, not fear, not yet, but the aftershock of steadying her aim through relentless fire. The hidden alley's precision had bought them seconds, nothing more. Still, seconds mattered. "Reload and scan," Mercer ordered. His voice carried that dry gravel tone soldiers recognized, the register of a man calculating odds without flinching. The net buzzed, then cleared again. The stranger had gone silent. No more instructions, no reassurance, just absence. For a heartbeat, Mercer wondered if they had imagined him. Then he shook off the thought. Bullets had fallen where they needed. That was proof enough. Far from the valley, tucked deep in timber country, Elias Ghost Kane leaned against the edge of a worn hunting cabin. The structure sagged on its posts, roof shingles warped by seasons of storms. Dust motes swam through slats in the boarded windows. A battered duffel sat open on a scarred table inside, its contents lined with care, a long rifle resting. In pieces, a coil of cleaning rods, a pouch of hand-loaded cartridges, each labeled in faded ink. Kane's hand moved slower than it once had, but the ritual was exact. He slid the bolt assembly into place, locked it with a practiced twist, then pressed his palm flat against the weapon's stock. The wood was cool, carrying the faint oil scent of years of maintenance. He closed his eyes briefly, listening to the weight of silence. Against one wall leaned a photograph framed under cracked glass. The image, yellowed with age, showed a group of younger men in fatigues, their faces sunburnt and defiant. Among them stood Jack Mercer, grinning crookedly with an arm around Kane's shoulders. Kane's thumb brushed the edge of that frame now, the way a man touches a scar. "You damn well laugh at me for this," he muttered, voice rasping with age and memory. "But I said I'd look out for your boy. Guess today's the day." He tucked the frame back under a folded blanket, then shouldered the rifle case. Outside, cicadas sang their endless summer hymn. Kane stepped onto the trail, boots sinking into the dust of forgotten logging roads. His knees complained, his back tightened, but each step drove him toward the gunfire, echoing faintly through the mountains. By the time he crested the first ridge above the gulch, his lungs ached. He crouched against a pine trunk, scanning through binoculars. Below him, through waves of heat, he spotted the embattled team, small shadows pressed against shattered stone, their movements disciplined, even under crushing fire. The boy at the center, Logan Mercer, lifted his head for a moment, signaling his operators. The tilt of his shoulders so much like his father's that Kane's chest tightened. He muttered, spitting image. "Hawk," the same damn stubborn tilt of the chin. Kane unslung his pack, laid out his rifle with careful speed. The scope clicked into place, the bipod bit into soil. He cycled around into the chamber, the brass sliding smooth. Through the glass, he found the enemy positions with the practiced ease of a man whose mind still remembered every formula for range and windage. The first target, a machine gunner leaning into his weapon too far, shoulders exposed. Kane steadied, drew in a breath, and let it slip away. The trigger broke. Across the valley, the man folded, weapon clattering against stone. Kane shifted, found the assistant trying to grab the belt feed. Another squeeze, another body down. In the gulch, Bravo team reacted instantly. Ramirez's voice cut sharp over the net, confirmed hits. "Someone's covering us." Mercer didn't answer right away. He felt his throat close briefly, memory and reality colliding. Whoever this shooter was, he carried a skill set that only a handful on the planet had ever honed. And that voice on the comms, Mercer couldn't yet name why it stirred. Something old, but he recognized the authority in its cadence. "Whoever you are," Mercer muttered under his breath, "you just changed the board." Above them, Kane worked methodically. His breathing matched the rhythm of cicadas, his body remembering a discipline the years hadn't fully stolen. Each shot cracked, each target toppled, forcing the enemy to break pattern. Yet for every man he felled, more shadows shifted, adjusting. Kane knew better than to think he alone could erase the threat, but he could tilt the scales. That was enough. He thumbed his radio again, speaking across the valley. "Bravo team, this is Ghost 6. Hold your line." On the ground, Ramirez froze when the voice returned. Her heart skipped. Not fear, not relief, but the shock of knowing they weren't abandoned. She whispered into her mic, acknowledged Ghost 6. Mercer finally keyed his transmitter, masking the surge of emotion behind command cadence. "Ghost 6, this is Hawk. Identify." A pause. Then Kane's voice, steady. "Not now. Later. Focus on surviving." The words carried weight Mercer couldn't ignore. His gut told him this was no random guardian angel. This was someone bound to their fight by history, by loyalty that reached deeper than orders. He pushed the thought aside, forcing himself back into the present. The enemy regrouped quickly, setting up new lines of fire to offset the mystery marksman. Bravo team adjusted in tandem, their hope rekindled, but their situation still dire. Kane shifted position, his joints protesting as he crawled to a new angle. Through his scope, he saw Malenkov's men rallying, their discipline intact despite losses. These weren't amateurs. They were professionals with scars of their own. As Kane lined up another shot, the wind gusted down the ridge, carrying with it the faintest echo of memory, the last mission he'd run alongside Jack Mercer, decades earlier, under a grey Berlin sky. He blinked, steadied, and fired. The battlefield roared again, but inside Kane's chest there was a strange stillness. He had come back, whether he wanted to or not. And down in the gulch, Logan Mercer understood. The ghost on the ridge wasn't just saving their lives. He was dragging the past into daylight, one shot at a time. The sun shifted westward, tilting its glare across the valley, and the fight that had seemed endless suddenly narrowed into moments. Bravo team crouched behind their scattered barricades, lungs burning, ears ringing. The fire from the opposite slope had slackened, not from mercy but because the hidden rifle had turned every exposed muzzle into a liability. Logan Mercer scanned the ridgeline through binoculars, the glass trembling slightly in his good hand. He caught flashes of figures scrambling back behind cover, commanders shouting in languages he recognized from another lifetime of deployments. He let the glasses fall against his chest. Someone out there was rewriting the tempo of the fight with each precise shot, and Mercer's instincts told him to trust it, for now. "Wolf," he called, shifting closer to Ramirez's position. "Talk to me." Her face was streaked with dust and determination. She kept her eye against her scope, fingers adjusting windage as though she were on a calm range rather than in the middle of a maelstrom. "They're trying to reposition heavy assets," she murmured. "But whoever's on our side just bought us space. I can hold lanes until they show themselves again." Mercer nodded, wiping grit from his brow with the back of his wrist. "Then we don't waste it. Reset ammo. Reassess fields. Everyone breathe." On the far ridge, Elias Kane shifted his elbows deeper into the soil, ignoring the ache in his joints. His rifle balanced on its bipod like an extension of his bones. Through his optic, he tracked the chaos below, Bravo team pulling together, each operator finding rhythm under pressure. His chest tightened as he focused on Logan. The young commander moved with a confidence born not just of training, but of heritage, a mirror of his father's posture during the Berlin years. "Still carrying your old man's stubbornness," Kane whispered, steadying the reticle on a mercenary peeking too far over a boulder. He squeezed. The man dropped. His radio crackled. Mercer's voice carried through, sharper now, seeking clarity. "Ghost 6, if you're really with us, give me a coordinate. I need proof you're not a trick." Kane allowed himself a dry chuckle, low and humorless. He toggled his mic. "Check your 9 o'clock, third shelf. 2 men in defilade. Watch." Ramirez adjusted her sightline. A moment later, a shot cracked from Kane's ridge. One target collapsed backward. The other flinched into the open, and Ramirez ended him cleanly. "Confirmed," she said, disbelief threading her tone. Mercer pressed his lips together. That was no hallucination. Whoever Ghost 6 was, he carried knowledge and precision that rivaled any sniper Mercer had read about. The lull fractured abruptly. Enemy mortar tubes coughed from hidden pits, sending shells arcing overhead. The explosions chewed fresh scars into the mountainside. pelting Bravo team with shards of rock. Rogers was flung sideways by a concussion wave, ears bleeding. Pruitt crawled toward him, dragging the injured man by his plate carrier. "Stay down!" Mercer roared, covering them with bursts from his carbine. Ramirez cursed softly as shrapnel grazed her leg, tearing cloth but not bone. She shoved the pain aside, eyes glued to her scope. Mortar crew, left gully. Kane already had them bracketed. His bullet snapped one man off his feet, then he swung to the loader. Another squeeze, another body fell. The tube fell silent, half buried in dirt. Ghost 6 neutralized the pit. Ramirez relayed, her voice taut but steadier now. The reprieve felt razor-thin. Mercer knew the enemy wouldn't keep feeding men into a grinder without adapting. He could almost sense them recalibrating, commanders shouting into radios, recalculating ways to smother this resistance. His headset buzzed again, and the same unyielding tone cut through. "Bravo, conserve your lives. I'll clear the teeth. You hold the heart." Mercer keyed back, frustrated by the cryptic guidance. "If you're this good, why the secrecy?" "Who the hell are you?" A pause, then only 3 words, an old promise. Ramirez blinked but said nothing. She understood enough to realize identity would come later. Survival mattered first. Kane exhaled slowly, repositioning along the ridge. Each crawl scraped stone against his fatigues, each motion reminding him of years lived in silence. He reached a new vantage, sighted another hostile preparing to flank the team's right. His shot rang, the man crumpled. Below, Halvorsen caught his breath long enough to whisper, "It's like a phantom's up there." Mercer didn't answer. He felt it too, that eerie blend of salvation and mystery. But he also knew phantoms could disappear as suddenly as they came. "Bravo, reform on me," he ordered. "Wolf, you've got Overwatch. Santos, check Rogers. Pruitt, you're his shadow until we pull out." The team obeyed, movements sharpened by the presence of an unseen guardian. For the first time in hours, Mercer allowed a sliver of hope past his guard. Yet deep inside, Kane's jaw clenched. He wasn't here to inspire hope. He was here to settle debts buried for 3 decades. Through his scope, he glimpsed Malenkov, scarred face unmistakable even at distance, barking orders behind a cluster of men. Memories surged. Berlin alleys slick with rain, Jack Mercer's final breath, the betrayal that had shattered everything. Kane steadied his aim, but the angle was wrong, the distance deceptive. He let the reticle hover, then lowered the rifle. Not yet. Timing mattered. Instead, he whispered into the radio, voice low enough that only Bravo team would hear. "Your fight's not random. They came prepared for you. Remember that." Mercer stiffened. He wanted to press, to demand answers, but the battlefield gave no room. Another wave of fire cascaded down the slope, forcing them flat once again. Through dust and ringing ears, Ramirez caught a glimpse of Kane's muzzle flash. Another hostile collapsed, and the team lived a few moments longer. For now, the ghost on the ridge kept them breathing, and with every round he sent, the past drew closer, carrying truths Mercer hadn't yet dared to face. The valley was littered with echoes, each gunshot swallowed by the canyon walls and hurled back in fragments. Bravo team crouched low, weapons ready but minds racing. The barrage had thinned, not because the attackers had abandoned their plan, but because they were shifting, looking for a new lever to pry the seals apart. Logan Mercer gritted his teeth as he scanned the ridges. He knew enough about battlefield rhythms to recognize when silence was only a mask. This wasn't the pause of defeat, it was the inhale before a shout. Eyes up, he ordered over the net. His words were short, clipped, but carried the weight of resolve. Beside him, Ramirez narrowed her gaze through her optic. The glass trembled slightly from the heat waves, but her discipline held firm. She swept across the jagged skyline, searching for the moment the enemy revealed its next move. Then it came. A booming voice rang out from across the gulch, amplified by terrain and authority. Orders barked in Russian-accented English, each syllable hammered with force. "Advance! Crush them!" Mercer's heart clenched. He knew that voice. He had heard it before, not in person, but in recordings buried in his father's old files, accounts from missions whispered about but never printed. Viktor Malenkov, the name itself carried a bitter resonance. A former Spetsnaz commander with a reputation for brutality. Mercer's pulse quickened. If Malenkov was here, this wasn't a random skirmish, it was orchestrated. On the ridge, Elias Kane steadied his breathing. Through his scope, he caught sight of Malenkov's profile, the deep scar dragging. From temple to jaw, the familiar gait of a predator used to command. Rage swelled, pressing against years of silence. His finger tightened on the trigger. One squeeze and decades of unfinished business would end. But the angle wasn't clean. Malenkov kept to partial cover, only exposing enough to bark orders and fade back. To fire now would risk giving away Kane's position prematurely. He muttered under his breath, the words almost a growl. "Not yet. Oh, you don't walk away this time, but not yet." Down in the kill zone, the enemy made its push. Fighters surged forward with renewed aggression, moving in disciplined pairs, laying down suppressive fire as others advanced. The canyon lit up with muzzle flashes, dust exploding in violent bursts around the seals. Halvorsen leaned out just far enough to cut one man down, then jerked back as a bullet skipped past his helmet. Pruitt pressed flat to the ground, whispering a curse before raising his weapon and emptying a burst into the encroaching line. "Hold your sectors!" Mercer barked. "Don't let them fold us inward!" Ramirez adjusted quickly, firing measured shots that staggered the momentum of the advancing flank. But for every hostile she pinned, another filled the gap. The enemy moved with the kind of coordination only drilled professionals carried. Then, amid the chaos, a distinct crack rose above the din. Kane had taken his shot, not at Malenkov, but at a squad leader signaling forward. The man dropped instantly, his command hand frozen mid-gesture. Confusion rippled through the attackers as their formation faltered. Mercer seized the opening. "Now! Push them back!" The SEALs erupted with disciplined fire, reclaiming inches of ground they hadn't dared lift their heads for in hours. Grenades lobbed short, detonating with concussive thunder that knocked enemy riflemen sprawling. Ramirez's scope tracked a runner trying to set another heavy emplacement. Her shot cut him down before the tripod hit dirt. Still, Malenkov remained. His guttural commands restored order to his men. He barked, and the mercenaries regrouped with frightening speed. Mercer's gut twisted. This wasn't just another commander. They were up against a predator who thrived on chaos and bent it to his will. On the high ground, Kane's teeth ground together. Through the glass, he caught Malenkov leaning forward, directing with that scarred face turned half toward him. The memory of Berlin seared back. Jack Mercer's last stand, the betrayal, the gunfire in the rain. Kane whispered, "I should have ended you there." He steadied his aim, drew in a lungful of dry mountain air and squeezed. The shot cracked across the canyon. Malenkov staggered, clutching his shoulder as the impact spun him sideways. His men shouted, dragging him behind cover. It wasn't the kill Kane wanted, but blood was drawn. In the gulch, Mercer's radio crackled with Ramirez's sharp voice. "Sir, did you see? He's hit!" Mercer's chest hammered. He knew what it meant. Malenkov wasn't just leading this ambush. He had been part of the story his father never lived to tell. The truth rushed into focus with terrifying clarity. "Wolf," he said tightly, "confirm the scarred Russian left shoulder wound." Ramirez adjusted her glass, peering through the shifting haze, confirmed. "It's him." Mercer felt heat rise behind his eyes. For years he had lived under the official account. That his father's death was training accident, a line written into sterile reports. But here stood the man who proved otherwise. Anger surged, but he caged it. Rage on a battlefield killed faster than bullets. He forced himself into command. "Bravo team, Malenkov is leading them. Stay sharp. This isn't over." The mercenaries retaliated with furious fire. Bullets smacked the stone inches above Mercer's head. Halvorsen cursed as his rifle jammed. Santos covered him, spitting rounds with a controlled fury. Ramirez kept her scope steady despite the storm. "They're rallying hard, sir. He's hurt but not gone." Above, Kane slid back, shifting position before counterfire traced his muzzle flash. His knees protested with each crawl, but his will remained iron. He whispered to himself as he moved, "Jack, your boy deserves the truth. He deserves to know." The battle raged on, each side clawing for dominance. Bravo team fought with the desperation of men and women unwilling to surrender, their courage welded together by years of trust. Malenkov's fighters pressed with the relentlessness of mercenaries, paid to finish the job or die trying. And above them all, Elias Kane loaded another round, steadying his scope once more. His body was old, his heart heavy, but his vow burned hotter than the sun over Blue Ridge. He would not let the past remain buried, not while Jack Mercer's son still fought in the dust below. The canyon stank of burned powder and churned soil. Echoes of the last exchange still ricocheted between ridges, but the attackers weren't finished. Malenkov's men, furious after their commander was wounded, swarmed with renewed ferocity. The gulch filled again with bursts of fire, tracer rounds cutting through haze like glowing claws. Logan Mercer crouched behind splintered stone, his bandaged hand throbbing but his mind clear. "Hold your angles," he barked. "Don't let them force us to the wash." He could see the enemy's plan forming, drive the team into the gully where they'd be boxed and annihilated. Ramirez lay prone, rifle anchored tight, scope aligned on a narrow crease between boulders. Through the shimmer of heat, she spotted 3 figures hustling a tripod. "New emplacement left ridge," she called. Her voice carried the urgency of someone who knew one unchecked gun could undo all their effort. Santos rolled from his cover, firing sharp bursts that slowed the crew, but it wasn't enough. The machine guns swung into position, belt feed rattling. Ramirez steadied her breath, her cheek welded to the stock. She knew the chance would be fleeting. A single second when the barrel settled. Before she could fire, another crack echoed from the high ridge. One crewman spun sideways, blood misting. Ramirez seized the opening, her shot drilling the second. The tripod toppled, the weapon clattering down the slope useless. "Good work," Mercer said, though his jaw stayed tight. Every exchange was survival by inches, and he knew inches eventually ran out. On the ridge above, Elias Kane cycled his bolt, chest heaving with the exertion of shifting positions again. His vision blurred for a heartbeat, the strain of age catching him, but he forced it aside. He remembered Jack Mercer's grin, rain falling in a ruined city, and the promise he had whispered over a dying friend. That vow dragged him forward now, one shot at a time, but the mercenaries adapted. They began using rock angles and blind fire, spraying corners rather than exposing heads. Kane cursed softly. Precision punished mistakes, but these men had learned fast. To break them again, he would need ingenuity. Down below, Rogers staggered upright, his arm freshly bandaged by Pruitt. "I can still shoot," he rasped, taking up his carbine one-handed. The younger operator steadied him, both men pressing shoulder to shoulder. Their defiance rippled across the team, strengthening spines that had begun to sag. Ramirez's optic caught sudden movement. A squad darted into a shaded ravine, clearly maneuvering for a flank. She shifted her barrel, but the angle was bad. "They're moving right, sir," Mercer swore under his breath. "If they get behind us, it's over." Above, Kane's scope tracked the same squad. They were using cover wisely, low silhouettes darting between stone outcroppings. He adjusted his elevation, calculating a shot, not at a body, but at the rock lip itself. He squeezed. The bullet struck stone, shattering shards downward. The fragments tore into the lead runner, who dropped screaming, breaking the squad's pace. Ramirez took the cue, angling fire into their hesitation, forcing them back. Her eyes widened at the realization Kane had ricocheted his shot deliberately, using stone as a weapon. It was a technique she had only read about in obscure sniper manuals, often dismissed as unreliable, but he had executed it flawlessly. She whispered into the net, half to herself, "He's bending the battlefield." Mercer heard, but didn't comment. The important thing was survival. And right now, Kane's mastery was tipping the scale. Yet in the back of his mind, the identity of Ghost 6 pressed harder. Whoever this man was, his skill and his cryptic words about an old promise tied directly to Mercer's own bloodline. The battle surged again. Explosions from thrown grenades shook loose shale that cascaded down the slope. Dust clouds rolled, choking visibility. Through the brown haze, Mercer glimpsed dark shapes closing in. He fired controlled pairs, forcing them to ground, but more kept coming. "Brace!" Santos shouted, hurling a grenade uphill. It detonated with a roar, scattering rock and screams. In the lull, Ramirez dragged air into her lungs, her heartbeat pounding like a war drum. She glanced at Mercer. His eyes flicked back, steel beneath exhaustion. No words passed, but the look was enough. "We're not finished." Above them, Kane rolled to a new nest, each motion grinding pain through his shoulders. He set his scope again, sweat dripping into his eyes. Malinkov's voice barked faintly across the canyon, urging his men onward despite his wound. The scarred commander still held sway, his iron will pushing the mercenaries past fear. Kane clenched his jaw. He could end Malinkov now, if the angle allowed. But another squad threatened Bravo's right. The choice burned inside him, revenge or duty. With a growl, he swung to the squad. Duty won. His bullet dropped the point man. Ramirez cleaned the second. She muttered, half in awe, "He's teaching us while he saves us." Mercer caught the remark. His father's stories whispered back through time, a comrade who never missed, a legend who vanished after Berlin. The puzzle pieces edged closer together, but no time for reflection. Another volley rained down. Bravo team pressed into the dirt, grit biting their cheeks. Mercer called over the net, voice iron, "We hold! If they want this valley, they bleed for every stone." The operators answered with renewed bursts, grit and fire blending into one. Above, Kane chambered again, whispering to the ghosts of Berlin, "Not yet, Jack, but soon your son will know." The mountain exhaled dust with every detonation, turning the air into a shifting veil that clung to skin and eyes. Bravo team huddled tighter, carving a line of resistance from the jagged rock. Each operator moved with the blunt economy of people running low on reserves, but unwilling to yield. Logan Mercer lifted his visor for a fraction, letting sweat streak down his temple before snapping it back. His wounded hand throbbed, but his mind stayed sharp. He could sense the enemy pulling back, regrouping not out of fear but strategy. This was no retreat. They were resetting the trap. "Status!" he demanded. Halvorson's rasp came first, still in the fight. Santos chimed in, ammo thin but workable. Ramirez's voice was steady. "I've got eyes. They're circling higher ground, planning another box." Mercer's chest tightened. It matched his own assessment. The mercenaries wanted to choke them with geometry, cutting escape before pressing in. Above, Elias Kane crouched against his ridge, rifle steady across the bipod. Through his glass, he saw exactly what Ramirez described. Teams peeling into, flanking arcs, each led by veterans who understood terrain warfare. He ground his teeth. The radio came alive. Mercer's voice clipped, but controlled. "Ghost 6, you see it?" Kane answered with calm certainty. "They're tightening the noose. But they've shown too much." He shifted his scope, drawing a bead on a commander, signaling with hand chops. Breath held, trigger eased. Another crack rolled across the valley. The target dropped. The formation stuttered. Ramirez seized the hesitation, firing in sync. Two silhouettes toppled, their momentum broken. For a heartbeat, the valley stilled. Then Mercer spotted something glinting near a shattered slab, a fragment of the beacon they had destroyed earlier. It wasn't fully gone. He realized with a jolt that fragments could still pulse location data. "Wolf," he snapped. "Finish the wreckage!" She adjusted, drilled 2 rounds into the broken device until sparks sputtered out completely. "Dead for sure now," she muttered. But Mercer's stomach twisted. That beacon hadn't arrived here by accident. It was US issue. Someone had put it into enemy hands. He pressed his mic low. "Ghost 6, talk to me. Who supplied that hardware?" Kane's silence stretched. When he finally spoke, his tone was grim. "Men with stars on their shoulders. You'll know their names soon enough." Mercer's jaw locked. That answered more than it should have. Before he could dwell, gunfire cascaded again. The mercenaries surged from cover with renewed ferocity, fury compensating for lost leaders. Bravo team met them head-on, rifles spitting fire, grenades bursting in thunderclaps. The canyon shook with violence, each blast flinging shards into the hot air. Ramirez rolled to a new position, ignoring the sting in her leg wound. Her scope found another heavy crew trying to reset. She took them apart piece by piece, first the loader, then the spotter, until only a useless barrel remained. Halvorson and Santos fought back to back, one firing while the other reloaded. Pruitt stayed close to Rogers, who shot one-handed but refused to sit out. Each man and woman carried not only their own weight, but the burden of those beside them. Mercer leaned out, squeezing careful bursts that drove enemies into cover. His voice cut through the channel, steady despite the roar. "They want to drown us. Don't let them breathe." And then came Kane's shot again, surgical, final. A sniper at the far ridge jerked back, scope shattered. The relief it brought Bravo team was immediate. But Kane didn't smile. He had seen more, Malenkov reappearing, shoulder bandaged, fury twisting his scarred face. He was rallying his remaining fighters, gesturing with a bloodied hand. The man's resilience was monstrous, a living symbol of unfinished wars. Kane whispered into the mic, voice raw, "Your commander. That scar, I knew him in Berlin. Your father bled because of him." Mercer froze. The words slammed into him harder than any bullet. His father's ghost had haunted his career, an absence filled with half-truths. Now the man responsible for that death was here, commanding the ambush meant to erase Bravo team. Ramirez heard the silence on her leader's end and knew. She glanced sideways, his eyes burned with a mixture of fury and clarity. "Then this fight isn't just survival," Mercer said, voice hardening. "It's justice." The radio carried Kane's final reply, steady as stone. "Then we see it through." The valley erupted again, smoke and fire pouring from both sides. Bravo team dug deep, pushing back with every ounce of grit left in their bones, and overhead, Elias Kane continued to strike with the patience of a man who knew vengeance was not far away. The noose was still tightening, but now, for the first time, Mercer understood why they had been targeted. This was bigger than his team. It was about betrayal rooted in his father's blood. And with that knowledge burning inside him, he vowed silently, this ambush would not be their grave. Smoke clung to the canyon floor, rolling in layers that blurred friend from foe. Bravo team hunkered down, each operator clutching their rifle like it was the last anchor holding them to life. The air vibrated with the memory of recent explosions, yet the gunfire had slowed. Mercer knew the silence was poisoned. He leaned into his comms, voice crisp. "Check perimeter. They'll try something different now." Ramirez shifted her scope along the upper ledges. Her lens cut through dust, tracing shadows that flitted like wraiths. "They're spreading wider," she reported, trying to box us from distance. Halverson spat dirt from his mouth. "Feels like they're bleeding time until reinforcements arrive, or until Malenkov finds a clean way to finish us," Mercer muttered. The name was ash on his tongue, heavy with the weight of Kane's revelation. Up on the ridge, Elias Kane adjusted his position again, old bones grinding against stone. Through his optic, he marked enemy elements establishing crossfire nests. Their discipline was clear, but so was their agitation. They had expected to crush a dozen soldiers easily. Instead, every advance had been carved apart. Kane's finger brushed the trigger. He chose a target, a radioman signaling frantically, and fired. The man crumpled, handset tumbling into grit. The attacker's net flickered with confusion. Ramirez seized the moment. "They're stalling! Push fire!" The SEAL surged, coordinated despite exhaustion. Bursts rattled across the valley, bullets chewing into rock faces where enemy fighters had been moments before. Then came the counterpunch. From the far slope, new shapes appeared. Operators in darker uniforms, heavier armor, more deliberate movement. Mercer's heart sank. These weren't mercenaries cobbled together for pay. These were professionals, a reinforcement squad trained to the same edge as his own. "Contact! Fresh unit!" he called. The firefight escalated with brutal speed. The new arrivals laid down sheets of disciplined fire, forcing Bravo team back into their cracks of stone. Dust erupted, choking lungs and stinging eyes. Rogers, still firing one-handed, growled through clenched teeth. They brought in killers to finish the job. Mercer's mind raced. If Malenkov had called in a second tier, it meant the beacon, though destroyed, had already transmitted long enough. Someone higher had sanctioned this ambush. He looked skyward, half expecting air support to appear, but the horizon stayed empty. Ramirez's scope caught Malenkov again, his bandaged shoulder dark with fresh blood. He was shouting, rage carved across his scarred features. The man radiated venom, yet his presence alone whipped the attackers back into formation. Mercer exhaled hard. "He's not leaving until we're all buried." Above, Kane steadied his rifle. His eye pressed deep into the scope, sweat dripping down his cheek. He saw Malenkov's face, framed perfectly for a killing shot. Every nerve in him screamed to finish it, to close a chapter 30 years old. But then a flicker of movement drew his attention. 3 enemy riflemen crawling toward Bravo Team's flank. If they succeeded, the SEALs would be shredded in seconds. Kane swore under his breath, swung off Malenkov, and fired into the crawlers. One by one they dropped, their ambush undone. Ramirez caught the ricocheted echoes and nodded sharply. She understood what he'd done. Once again, he'd chosen the team over his vengeance. Mercer keyed his mic, voice hoarse but fierce. "Ghost 6, keep breathing for us. We'll do the rest." The Ridge answered with another shot, crisp and final. The battle had shifted into a war of attrition, both sides clawing ground in increments. Yet for the first time, Mercer felt the thread of something larger pulling tight, a hidden hand orchestrating beyond Malenkov. The betrayal wasn't just one scarred commander and his hired guns. It was tied to ranks far above, men in polished offices who had sent killers into this valley to erase the truth. And as Bravo Team fought with blood and grit, Mercer knew the real fight had only begun. The canyon's edges smoldered with the residue of battle. Every rock bore scars, pockmarks from rounds, blackened smears from grenades, and streaks of blood that had dried under the merciless sun. Bravo Team crouched low, eyes scanning constantly, each soldier worn to the core, yet unwilling to collapse. Logan Mercer wiped grit from his brow with the back of his sleeve, his chest rising in short bursts. He knew the rhythm of firefights, how they evolved, and he could feel this one straining toward its final act. Their attackers were thinning but not breaking. Whoever commanded them had enough will to squeeze out every ounce of violence left. Ramirez whispered from her position, "They're shifting back to the far ridge. I can see movement like they're pulling heavier packs." "Extraction prep," Mercer guessed, "or they're buying time for something worse." Above, Elias Kane settled deeper into his nest. He had relocated once again, crawling until his elbows ached and his knees screamed. Through his scope, he watched Malenkov lean heavily on 2 men, still barking orders despite blood staining his sleeve. The scarred commander looked weaker, but his eyes blazed with the same venom Kane remembered from Berlin. Kane's finger brushed the trigger, the desire for closure burning like acid. One squeeze would end 3 decades of unfinished war. But then his gaze shifted, past Malenkov, to a cluster of operators unpacking, crates marked with stenciled numbers Kane recognized instantly. Those weren't ammunition boxes, they were demolition charges. He muttered, "They're planning to bury the valley." Mercer's voice crackled in his earpiece. "Ghost 6, report." "They've set charges," Kane replied. "If they light them, you're all done." Ramirez swore under her breath. "They'd collapse the canyon on top of us?" "They'd rather erase evidence than lose," Kane said grimly. Mercer's jaw tightened. He finally understood. This ambush wasn't just about eliminating his team. It was about concealing a truth rooted in his father's death. If Bravo was buried here, the betrayal would remain hidden. "Wolf, mark the crates," Mercer ordered. Ramirez adjusted her scope. "Got them, but they're under heavy guard." Kane chambered a fresh round. "I'll thin the circle. You finish the job." The battle reignited. Kane fired first, punching holes in the ring of guards. Ramirez followed with surgical shots, each one pushing the enemy defense thinner. Halvorsen and Santos laid down suppressive fire, chewing the slope with bursts that forced heads down. Pruitt and Rogers shifted left, protecting the flank from counterattack. Explosions rattled as stray rounds hit loose ordnance. Dust and smoke churned, masking vision. But Bravo Team pressed forward. They knew hesitation meant entombment. Mercer raised his voice above the chaos. "Push! Destroy those crates!" Ramirez locked onto the nearest box and squeezed. Her bullet struck true, igniting the explosive within. A thunderclap split the valley, flame blooming outward. The blast consumed half the cache, hurling debris skyward. The remaining guards panicked, scattering for cover. Kane cut them down methodically, though his breathing grew ragged with every shot. Mercer's team unleashed everything left. Grenades arced, rifles spat, the air vibrating with the sound of defiance. One by one, the remaining charges went up in fireballs, shaking the ground beneath their boots. The canyon rocked but didn't collapse. The threat was gone. Malenkov's roar carried even across the din. He staggered into view, fury twisting his scarred face. Blood streaked his cheek, his bandaged arm dangling. Yet his presence still commanded attention. He raised a pistol and fired blindly down at Bravo's positions. Kane steadied his rifle. This time there was no hesitation. His scope framed the man who had haunted his nightmares and Jack Mercer's legacy. He whispered, "For Berlin." Then he fired. The round struck Malenkov square in the chest. The Russian staggered, tried to shout again, but his voice died in a wet gurgle. He toppled backward, sliding down the rocks, finally silenced. Ramirez exhaled, a long, trembling breath. Target neutralized. Mercer felt a storm inside him. Rage, grief, vindication all colliding. He forced himself to stay focused. The man responsible for his father's death was gone, but the deeper betrayal still remained. Someone in his own chain of command had armed Malenkov with US hardware and sent him here to finish the job. Kane's voice broke the static. "You've got what you need to prove it. The beacon, the crates, my testimony. Don't let them bury the truth." Mercer swallowed hard. "Who are you?" The reply was quiet but unflinching. "I was Jack Mercer's spotter in Berlin. Elias Kane, Ghost 6. The canyon seemed to freeze. Bravo team, battered and bloodied, felt the weight of the name. Mercer's father had spoken of a partner, a sharpshooter who vanished after Berlin. Now the ghost stood revealed, a living link to the past. Mercer's throat tightened. "You've been out there all this time?" "Living in shadows," Kane answered, waiting for the day the lie came back around. And it has. Silence stretched across the channel. For once, even the battlefield seemed to pause, as if acknowledging the gravity of the revelation. Finally, Mercer spoke, his voice rough but resolute. "We end this together. No more shadows." Extraction finally crackled over the net. Rotor blades inbound, command suddenly aware of their survival. But Mercer no longer trusted the voices from above. He trusted only those beside him and the sniper who had saved them from annihilation. The team formed a defensive circle, weapons trained outward, until the helicopters descended. Dust whipped into their faces as ropes dropped. Bravo climbed one by one, hearts heavy with the knowledge of betrayal but buoyed by the bond forged in fire. Kane remained on his ridge, watching. He did not descend with them. His oath had been fulfilled. Jack Mercer's son lived, and Malenkov was dead. But as the aircraft lifted away, Mercer's eyes found him. Across the gulf of distance, their gazes locked. Kane raised a gloved hand in silent farewell. Mercer returned the gesture, a promise of reckoning unspoken but certain. Weeks later, Berlin. Mercer stood in the shadow of an old building, its foundations cracked, its walls scarred by time. Ramirez and Santos worked beside him, prying loose a concrete slab. Behind it, tucked into a hollow, they found a weathered container. Inside lay microfilm reels, evidence Jack Mercer had hidden decades before, proof of collusion. names of men in uniforms who had fed information to enemies. Ramirez's hands shook as she held one reel up to the light. This is everything. Mercer nodded grimly. Now we know who's been pulling strings. He closed the container, eyes narrowing. The fight had shifted. No longer just survival on a battlefield. It was a war against betrayal seeded in their own ranks. At Arlington, weeks later, a ceremony honored Jack Mercer. The truth was finally acknowledged. His death had not been an accident, but a sacrifice buried beneath lies. Among the crowd, Elias Kane appeared briefly at the edge, silent, almost spectral. He stood by the grave, one hand pressed to the stone, then turned before anyone else could approach. His shadow slipped into the rows of headstones, a ghost fading once more. Logan Mercer watched from the podium. He understood. Some men belonged to daylight, others to twilight. But Kane's vow had been kept. As the flag rippled in the breeze, Mercer whispered to himself, "No more phantoms. We carry the fight forward." Bravo team stood behind him, bruised but unbroken, the bond between them sealed forever by that valley of fire. The smoke of that valley may have cleared, but its echoes still travel through every ridge, every scar carved into stone. Bravo team survived, not because they were stronger, not because they carried more firepower, but because someone who had once vanished into legend stepped back from the shadows. Elias Kane, Ghost 6, didn't return for glory. He didn't come back to be remembered or to stand in front of medals. He returned for a promise, a bond between brothers in arms that time and betrayal could never erase. 30 years ago, he swore he would watch over Jack Mercer's son. In that canyon, he proved a promise outlives the man who makes it. Logan Mercer walked away from that battlefield carrying more than scars. He carried the truth. He carried proof that betrayal wasn't just whispered in dark alleys, but orchestrated in the highest halls of power. And he carried the knowledge that his father's death was not meaningless, not forgotten, not erased. For Ramirez, Santos, Halvorson, Rogers, and Pruitt, that day became more than survival. It became initiation into a deeper fight. They had stared into the jaws of certain death, and they had witnessed how one rifle, one steady hand could shift the course of history. Ramirez especially knew she had seen something rare, a glimpse of a dying art, a sniper bending the battlefield itself, teaching her without words. The seed of that lesson would carry into every mission she touched from that day forward, and Malenkov, the scarred predator who had cast his shadow across generations, he fell in the same dust he had once controlled. His voice silenced not by politics, not by negotiations, but by the iron precision of a man he thought forgotten. For Kane, it was justice delivered at last. For Mercer, it was the closing of a wound he had carried his entire career. But make no mistake, this was not a victory tied up neatly with a ribbon. The deeper war remained. The beacon, the crates, the microfilm hidden in Berlin, all pointed to something larger, darker, rooted in their own chain of command. It proved that enemies aren't always across the border. Sometimes they sit behind desks, shaking hands in bright rooms while sending good men and women into traps designed to erase them. And that is what Bravo team carried home. Not relief, not triumph, but resolve. To expose what was buried, to hold accountable those who thought they could trade loyalty for power, to continue a fight their fathers had begun. As the ceremony at Arlington drew to a close, with Jack Mercer's sacrifice finally honored, Elias Kane slipped away once more. No speeches, no headlines, just a ghost vanishing into the rows of white headstones where thousands of others rested who had also given more than they were asked. Logan Mercer watched him go, and he understood Some legends don't stay. Some guardians aren't meant to live in daylight. But Cain had given him something greater than presence. He had given him the truth and the courage to keep walking forward. And now, as you sit watching this story, ask yourself, how many promises echo through your own life? How many debts of loyalty remain unpaid, waiting for the moment when they are finally called in? This is more than a war story. It is about honor, about the weight of history, about the voices that refuse to stay buried. If this story moved you, if you believe in remembering those who stood when it mattered most, then let us know. Comment below. Tell us what part of this journey struck you deepest. Tell us where you are watching from, because stories like this reach across oceans, borders, and generations. This is VeteranBiker. Thank you for riding with us through the dust and fire. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to be reminded that legends never truly die. And when the next story appears on your screen, stay with us, because the fight is far from over.